To see you is the end and the beginning. You carry me and you go before. You are the journey and the journey's end. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to be here at the beach. I grew up on the beach, so it's great to be back at the beach. I live in the mountains now, but it's great to be back at the beach. And it's wonderful to be with you all. I'd like to begin this morning with a little litany of thanksgiving. I'm a big believer that Thanksgiving is the great entry point to a life of prayer and a relationship with God, because when we offer our thanks and acknowledge our thanks to God for all the blessings of this life that we have, I think that kind of naturally leads us on to praise and adoration and petition and all the other forms of prayer that we read about in the Catechism. So I'd like to begin by thanking Father John for allowing me to be here this morning. I know I'm a long line of Food for the Poor speakers here, so and I'd like to thank all of you for bearing with me for a few moments this morning so I can speak with you. And I'd like to thank those of you who have given the Food for the Poor in the past. And last but not least, to the Episcopal Church, and therefore I guess to myself, because historically Episcopalians have been very generous supporters of Food for the Poor. And last but not least, thanks that my banjo stayed relatively in tune. Banjos do not like to travel. You all know this? Please join in. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. I'd like to talk to you for a few moments this morning about grace. About 4 or 5 months ago, I had the opportunity to take a trip to Jamaica with Food for the Poor to visit some of the ministries that Food for the Poor is involved in. And I don't know about you, but like most Americans, when I think of Jamaica, I think of vacations. Right? Blue water, sandy beaches, big hotels, right? And this is very true on the north side of the island. But the rest of the island is really very much a third world country. And you get into the interior or around the other coasts, and it is really just replete with a tremendous amount of poverty, disease, and very great sadness. And I was not on the North Shore. I was in Kingston, actually. Spent a few days there, about 4 days there, and had the opportunity to explore some of the ministries. And had the same experience I always have when I go to a third world country, and that is, it's like a roller coaster ride. Because when you first get there, if you've ever been to a third world country, it's really a major slap in the face, because the kind of poverty you see there is really not something you really generally see in the United States at all. I mean, really destitute people. And so that really brings you down, you know. And then you meet the people, and of course the great thing about people is that people are people. And even poor people have dreams, hopes, and aspirations, and are lovely and giving and caring, and you meet with these Christian communities and you develop friendships, and then you spend the rest of the week on a roller coaster ride having very upsetting thoughts about the conditions that you see people living in, and also having great experiences of relationships with people and working with them. So that's just always a common thing. And when I was in Jamaica this time, the highlight of my journey was a visit to a young woman named Palomina. We went driving out of Kingston into the country, and it's like driving in the jungle. It's Caribbean country. It's really lush, and driving through these roads and in this jungle-like atmosphere, and then all of a sudden it'll open out onto a little village of shacks, and with just barely covered roofs and just real situations of terrible living conditions. And we pulled up to this house, which was not Palomina's house, it was actually a parent's house. And we went in. Palomina's house had burnt down, and she was living with her parents. And she was living in a single room. I don't think there were any windows in it. There were basically 3 mattresses, old mattresses on the floor, and in that room was living Palomina, her 6 children, including her 2 infant children, and her nephew and her uncle, all in one room. So imagine being in a tropical country and walking into a 12 by 12 or 12 by 14 room with 9 people living in it. The smell, and the only thing on the wall, I think, was a little plaque that said, "With God, all things are possible," which immediately struck me as incredibly incongruous. This is when faith starts to be like, okay, what do you have to say to me here, God? And we talked to her for a while and learned that they didn't have enough food in the house. The kids were hungry. The formula she had to use for her children and her infants, she could only afford about half of it, so they were always going hungry. It was just a really sad scene, and it was demonstrated particularly by the fact that Palomina had absolutely no affect on her face. It was like a blank screen. She answered questions, but it was really kind of mechanical, So we spent a little time with them and listened to their story and thanked them, as we always do when we go to visit someone, and gave them some food. And we moved on. I spent the rest of the week exploring other ministries that Food for the Poor is involved in, because Food for the Poor, belying the name, is not just about food. Food for the Poor, as you guys know, builds houses, because I think you guys built a house at one point. You guys are great. Builds houses, does water projects, does aquaculture projects, fruit trees, small business development, animals. We do animal husbandry. Food for the Poor does everything, because the interest in this ministry is to meet the holistic needs of people, to give them a sense of hope and a future, and to try and raise them up out of the destitute poverty in which they find themselves. So at the end of the week, had a great week and saw these great things that are being done. We find ourselves driving through the jungle again, and we open out on a village again, and we pull up to a house and go, oh, this looks familiar, and all of a sudden we realize we were back where we started at the beginning of the week. Because what we didn't know was that in honor of our visit, it was a speaker's visit, we go to see the ministry that Food for the Poor titled, was that in honor of our visit, they had built a house for Palomina. She'd been in line for a house. We have these the houses are kind of like kits in Jamaica, about 450 square feet, and the crews can put them up in 6 hours. So the minute you buy a house, the minute you spend that $3,200, bam, a house goes up, right? It's great. There was Palomina outside this house, which was behind her parents' house, and there was this incredibly broad grin on her face. It was like she had come to life. It was like a resurrection, And we were there for the housewarming, for the welcoming. It was really. I felt like I was cheating. It was a Jimmy Stewart moment. It's a Wonderful Life. When the family goes into the house. And we got to say the prayer and welcome them and give them the keys and all that, which is a tremendous commodity in a third world country. A house with a roof and a solid lock on the door. Amazing, right? And she was all animated and had come to life. It was great. And to see what can happen through the generous giving of people in the first world to help people in the third world is really a phenomenal sight. It's something that I'll always carry with me, and hopefully you folks always get the chance to carry with you as well. And every time this happens, I'm aware that this is the gospel come to life, because this is, as far as I'm concerned, the core of what Jesus was about. Reaching out to those in need, particularly to people on the margins of society and most destitute people in society, right? And we see this, we've been listening to the Gospel of Luke all year, and we see this particularly in the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus reaches out to those on the margins of society, always helping those who are most displaced, most in need, on whatever level that is, spiritual, physical, mental, emotional, the whole 9 years, monetary, the whole 9 yards. So this is at the core of the gospel. We see this at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, when Jesus comes into his home synagogue in Nazareth in the 4th chapter of this gospel, right? And he comes in and he opens up the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, and he reads, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And it's no accident that this is in the beginning of this gospel, because for the author of the Gospel of Luke, This is Jesus' mission statement. And everything he does after that is about what he did in that synagogue in Nazareth. And that is the heart of Christian ministry. We even see it today in the gospel a little bit with this great story, almost comical story, of the Pharisee and the tax collector, right? Because one of the principal differences between the Pharisee and the tax collector is the Pharisee did not embrace humanity. He thought he was great, he thought he was above humanity, right? And whatever good he did, he didn't get the common needs, concerns, and failures of all human beings. So he didn't even understand what it was to be human. Whereas the tax collector, for all his faults, right, recognized his humanity. And so there was hope. Right? There was hope for him because he realized that he was human like everyone else. And all of us have needs, wants, and desires. All of us have successes and failures. Right? And that is what it means to be human, to recognize that we're all in the same boat. That, for instance, that any one of us could have been born in a third world country instead of a first world country. We could be living in poverty, right? We have been privileged to be born in a first world country. So this is the core of Jesus' ministry, and this is a central part of the ministry of Food for the Poor, to let people in the first world have an immediate access to the needs of those in the third world, whom they can reach out with their humanity and raise those folks up in their humanity by providing for some of their needs. And everywhere I go, I know I'm preaching to the choir. So don't, okay? I mean, I know you guys get it. I know you, and I can see both from your history with Food for the Poor and in your own parish that you all have a heart for the poor and a compassion for the poor. St. Mary's Table, St. Gregory's Food Pantry, right? I think they said you guys built a house at one point. I know that's there for you. And I'm here just to be kind of maybe an image of what all you have done and what you continue to do for those most in need. And I come representing you because you are Food for the Poor. It's only your compassionate caring and support that make it possible to raise people out of poverty, to meet the Millennium Development Goals, all of these things, right? This is what Food for the Poor, you, are about. And Food for the Poor's ministry, as many of you know, reached out to the most destitute poor in 17 different countries in the Caribbean and Latin America. And I am here, yes, to talk about that and debate for that. So having said that, let me ask you to pull out your brochures that you have in your bulletins. This is our new brochure, so for those of you who are familiar with Food for the Poor, you probably haven't seen this one yet. And you can read through this, take it home, and get a little bit more information about Food for the Poor, or go to foodforthepoor.org. But what I like to always point out is if you look at the other side of the page with the thick yellow line, and look just to the left of it, it's always amazes me how far first world dollars go in the third world. So we save lives. You save lives in the third world with your gifts from the first world. So for instance, for $3,200, you can buy a house, or St. Mary's can build a house. Maybe you'd like to build another one. That would be great. And actually, in some of the countries we operate in, there's a matching grant, so you get 2 houses for the price of 1. For $205, you can put in a water pump in a village. And I'm sure many of you are aware that in the third world, medicine is certainly very important, but water is the cause of so much of the disease. Having access to fresh water is just critical, right? And the one that always gets me, because it really shows it to me most, is for $43.80, you can feed a child for a year. It costs Food for the Poor 6 cents to deliver a rice and beans meal to a hungry child, to a child that might starve, right? 2 times a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, $43.80. Most of us will spend more than that on lunch or brunch after we leave church this morning if we go out, right? So the opportunity to save a life and to raise up a life with hope is just so immediate for us. It's really a blessing, actually. And if you place a finger on both sides of the yellow line and pull, you will see, of course, that this is an envelope. Because my brothers and sisters, lovingly I say, I am not just here for your compassion, I'm here for your money. And most of you are aware of that. Because that's what makes it happen. That's what we've got. That's the gift we have to give to relieve suffering in the world. That's the way you become Food for the Poor in the world. So I'd ask you to make a gift today. There's actually a little envelope here, you can put it in. I'd ask you to fill out your name and address so we can thank you and give you proper tax credit for it. You get to lick. No one gets to lick anymore because we all have self-adhesive stamps. But please give us your information so we can continue to have the relationship that we already have with St. Mary's, which is so wonderful. And then you can hand these to me on the way out, and I will make sure that they get to the office. But more than that, let me ask that you consider a regular gift of food for the poor, pledging, if you will. Because Jesus said that the poor will always be with you. And so part of our responsibility is always meeting that need. So my wife and I, every year, when we make out our budget, to the extent that we make out a budget, we're not great budgeters, the first thing we do is make our pledge to the church, so that the work of Christ goes on in the world, and I'm sure that's coming up, and I know you will all make your pledge to the church. And the next thing we do is we choose the charities, both secular and religious, that we think do the work of Christ in the world, and we support them on a regular basis. And I hope you'll consider food for the poor to be one of those things that you might add to that list for you. Because every time we reach out to someone in need, whether it's physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, financially, we become Christ in the world. We are the grace of God, and God's grace is manifest in the world again and in a new way. And so, having said that, I will end exactly where I began, with grace. Please join me again. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saves